Alright, so to replace the heating assembly, as always, you want to make sure the unit's unplugged, the top cabinet's been removed, the control panel has been unplugged. We're going to go ahead and use needle nose pliers and unplug the heating assembly from the power board. Next, on low torque setting, we're going to remove the wire clamp screw. We're going to loosen the fan and also loosen the heating assembly mount as well. Next, we want to remove the thermocouple or the heat sensor from the board, which is this blue wire. In some cases, in older models, it's a white wire, but it's the wire coming from the heating assembly. And to remove the heating assembly, to remove the heating assembly, we're going to hold the unit, slightly lift up the fan, and slides right out. So you have the entire unit in your hand. The fan stays in place. It may have moved a little bit, which is fine. You can put that back later. So now we have the heating assembly. I'm going to remove the wires. The next step to fully remove this heater is to remove the screws. And it should slide right out. So this is the heating assembly we're removing. To reinstall the heating assembly, we're going to go ahead and connect the heater to the body. It should lock right in, and the screws should line right up. Push it in snugly. And a slightly higher torque setting. You want to secure these screws. You want this to be really firmly in place. So first we need to loosen the motor so we can freely spin the left side. And to that, you take a screwdriver and simply leverage it this way, just gently. It doesn't need a lot of pressure. Next, we want to install the arm of the right side and the heater back into place. We want to be careful that our bearings are in place. It's very common for these to fall off or slide off. They're not secured with anything, just in place on the arms, the small arms. So you want to just make sure those are in place, the bearings. We're going to slightly tilt our fan up. The fan has been unscrewed on one side, and it will allow you to move it and flex it up a bit. So gingerly flex that up to receive the arm. You want the bearing to rest on this lip. The same thing with the inside bearing as well. And then that should fit right in with the gear. So now the drive and the gear are together. So when you're seating your heating assembly, you want to make sure you go ahead and use your roast chamber to make sure it's aligned correctly, the left and the right side. You can have your roast chamber slide right in. It's going to be a little bit, there's going to be some extra movement in it because it's not fully secured down with screws yet, but you'll get the idea if it's locked in or not. If it's not secured, if it's not aligned, excuse me, you're going to need to slightly remove your heating assembly again to rotate it either back or forward off of the gear. That'll allow you to move it independently from the left side. Then you get it lined up and get it to sit properly. So once it's seated, I like to keep it there. Just keeps everything lined in, gives you a little bit more stability as well. Your wires are going to actually want to go back underneath this screw and this mount and then run to the rear of the roaster that way. In older models, you'll have a ground wire that will also go to the front of the roaster. So all 4 potentially wires need to go underneath this bracket. So seat it back in. Again, always make sure your bearings are in place. The wiring has been run. And we can reconnect. We can take our thermocouple, reconnect it to the board. It's very careful. You don't want to break any pins. That's the only wire you remove from this board. And go ahead and tuck the wire right along with the fan wire. You want it to be nice and snug along the side. We're going to take our wires that go from the heater to the power board, still clamped down. We're going to return them underneath the front wires that supply the power to the machine. And really carefully, these bend very easily. So you want to make sure you use needle nose pliers always. So we're going to go ahead and reconnect our heating assembly with needle nose. And that is secure, ready to go. Next we want to secure the 3 wires down to the board so they don't float inside the casing. So we're going to take our thermocouple wire, or the heat sensor wire, the 2 power supply wires to the heat sensor, to the heating element. Use our screw. And on a low torque setting, we want to secure them to the board. They're plastic, so the plastic casing, you don't really need to drill them down really hard. You could strip it very easily. So that is returned to place. Next we'll secure our screws back to the frame to secure the heating assembly, and these you can do on a slightly higher torque setting because these are metal threads. And we'll also secure our fan. Then to finalize the setup of the new heater, you want to go ahead and engage the motor and the gears back together. So you take that same screwdriver. You may need to rotate this just so it lines up. Just very carefully, it's plastic, you don't want to crack it. Just slightly move it back in place. There we are, seated all the way in, the gears line up, and it should be ready to go. So that is replacing the heating assembly in a nutshell. At this point, you will go ahead and reconnect your control board, put the unit back together, put the cover back on, and the first time you roast with the new heating assembly, before you roast the heating assembly, you want to run the heater momentarily without any coffee at all. It's going to have a quick burn-off cycle where some smoke comes out, and that's totally normal. And after that point, the heater will run clean and run as it should.